Hello and happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm John Long, the Director of Education here at the National D-Day Memorial. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Bedford, Virginia, at least virtually, and to share with you a program today on a very important and yet often forgotten story from D-Day. Later on in our presentation, I'm going to bring in a special guest. But for the moment, I just want to talk to you about this say undertold story, and I want to begin it with actually a couple of provocative questions for you to mull. First one, as we get closer to D-Day in June of 1944, given that the Allies have such overwhelming superiority in ships, in planes, in technology, and industrial output, was there anything Nazi Germany could do that could make this invasion fail? Now, certainly stiffer resistance than we met, bad weather, all these things could have conceivably happened. But was there anything that Nazi Germany could do to keep us from ever getting on the beach to begin with on D-Day? While you're mulling that question, let me ask the second provocative question as an introduction, which is who were the first Allied fatalities in the Normandy invasion? I think if you ask most people who style themselves sort of World War II buffs or D-Day buffs, they might say, oh, it was a paratrooper, maybe even named Den Brotheridge, the British paratrooper at Pegasus Bridge. Others might say a pilot who was shot down in the early hours of D-Day. But the answer to both those questions really revolves around the story I'm going to tell today, a topic for our lecture, the little-known saga of the USS Osprey. AM 56 was its registry number. It's a Raven class minesweeper in the English Channel on June 5th, 1944. And it answers our questions for a couple of reasons, because while many things certainly could go wrong and did go wrong with the invasion, and it very easily could have become a great American defeat instead of a great American victory that brings this beautiful memorial to Bedford years later. One thing that certainly could have unhinged all the carefully laid plans for D-Day were German mines. The mines in the English Channel that the Germans had sown around potential landing beaches as part of their Atlantic wall. These could have easily been absolute disasters, chased the Allied fleets away from the coast of France entirely, and kept these landing craft of frightened infantrymen heading toward Omaha Beach or Utah Beach or one of the British Canadian beaches. The mines could have left them off of the beach to begin with. They certainly do enough damage, but it could have been even worse, even more disastrous, except for one thing, and that was the Allied minesweeper fleet that is clearing the channel prior to the invasion. And that also brings us to the Osprey and the answer to the second question, because in fact, the first Allied fatalities for the Normandy invasion, Operation Neptune naval component of the bigger Operation Overlord, the first fatalities, the first men to fall, were aboard that little minesweeper so early in the invasion that their dates of death are actually June 5th. Here at the National D-Day Memorial, we have the names of 4,415 men on our memorial wall who died on June 6th. But it's often forgotten there were 6 others who died the day before, who paid the highest sacrifice any serviceman can. And yet, as I say, their story has been not lost to history, but certainly is underappreciated in many of the history books and in our own public memory of D-Day. So let's start with a little bit of description about the Osprey and bring up my PowerPoint. And here is the Osprey taken earlier in the war, obviously, not on D-Day, but in fact, soon after it launched from Norfolk. And then go to the next one. And we see this little graphic I found from the war that kind of explains what minesweepers did, why they were important. So if you see on the bottom of the Channel Coast there, the mines that are floating up, designed to hit bigger ships than the minesweeper. Ideally, this is gonna. The Germans want this to take out a battleship or a cruiser or a troop transport, not a small little vessel like the Osprey. But the minesweepers are going to come through, towing behind that contraption that you see, made up of cables and sweep wires. And the idea is that it will catch the cables that are holding the mines to the floor and bring them up where they can be destroyed, if nothing else, just by shooting them with the minesweepers' guns. It's a very dangerous job, as you can imagine, and many minesweepers say are going to be hit by the mines they're trying to sweep. But it was absolutely crucial. And the idea again is, if you'll click again for me, and I know this is probably not the clearest graphic that I could show you, but it shows, if you can follow it, the channels that the minesweepers were going to clear in the hours leading up to the invasion. The invasion, of course, is set for originally for June 5th, but then delayed 24 hours by a storm. And the very carefully laid out timetable for the invasion involved the minesweepers coming in hours before any man is going to hit the beach, hours before even the paratroopers are going to jump. The minesweepers are going to be clearing very carefully planned corridors to the beaches of mines and marking them with floating buoys so that they can be found by the landing craft that are coming into the beaches. It's an absolutely crucial job because, again, obviously, if a large percentage of the landing craft carrying the invasion force hit mines and sink in the channel, then the whole invasion is going to fall apart. Our job on D-Day is to get ultimately about 156,000 men onto the beaches between the beach landings and the parachute and glider forces. And if many of them instead go down in the channel, this invasion will never happen. So the minesweepers are doing an absolutely essential job. And not only on D-Day, but in many other battle zones in Europe and in the Pacific. And it's no wonder the motto of the World War II minesweepers was, quote, "Where the fleet goes, we've been." They've already been there. And given that task, that absolutely essential task, and the obvious risks involved in it, it's probably no surprise that the first men lost in a battle like D-Day would be aboard a minesweeper. So the Osprey is, to go back a little bit of detail, the Osprey was built here in Virginia at the Norfolk Navy Yard, commissioned in 1940, and given obviously the job of clearing mines, occasionally other jobs, even setting mines early in the war. It does service in the Caribbean, looking for German submarines, and then service in the North African invasion in 1942. And before being assigned to the minesweeping flotilla of Operation Overlord, or Operation Neptune was the naval component of this. And it's given the job then as soon as the order is given by Eisenhower that the invasion is on for June 6th, 24 hours later than originally planned. Then the minesweepers go right to work. And it is in this context that the Osprey hits a mine about 5:00 p.m. on June 5th, 1944. The little vessel ran into what appeared to be a floating mine off the coast, not too far south of the coast of the Isle of Wight. So really closer to England than it was to France. And it touches off an explosion which happened to occur near the storage lockers for the ship's ammunition. Now you can imagine that's going to magnify the explosion and create great damage. It's going to be a heroic effort to try to save the vessel, extinguish the fire by the Osprey crew, but to no avail. They couldn't stop the flooding and will be forced to abandon ship. We happen to have an account of that event written by the ship's commander, who was C.H. Swim, kind of a cool name for a Navy commander. But C.H. Swim, as required, had to write a report on the loss of his vessel, which he did and turned over to Navy commanders on June 17th. And I'll read some excerpts of it because it gives a very good report of the loss of the Osprey. So, one, at 06:30, 5 June 1944, the USS Osprey AM-56 got underway in company with Mine Squadron 7 as a part of the minesweeping forces engaged in the invasion of France. 2, en route to the point where Mine Squadron 7 would take sweeping formation, a cruising disposition was taken consisting of 4 columns with 3 ships in each column. The USS Osprey was second ship in port column with the USS Ock ahead and the USS Raven astern. The Raven is sort of a sister ship to the minesweeper. Remember, the Osprey is Raven class minesweeper. 3, at 1759, 5 June 1944, zone -2 time, in other words, the wartime version of daylight savings time, while still in disposition, outlined in paragraph 2, the USS Osprey struck under the forward engine room what is believed to be a moored contact mine. 4, as a result of the mining, the USS Osprey was lost. Now, then he goes on to describe in a little more detail. Paragraph 5, a blast ripped open the forward engine room, blew open diesel tanks in forward engine room, lifted 100 kilowatt generator over against the main engine, and then it carried up, and the explosion carried up and through the mess hall deck, from whence it vented by blowing open the deck housing and all watertight doors in mess hall and galley. The main deck amidships was folded back and bulkheads pushed back as far as the trunk to the after magazine, which was buckled to such extent as to prevent entry to the after magazine. In other words, enormous damage as a result of the explosion. All fire mains were ruptured. The fire broke out simultaneously with the blast and rose about 60 feet. 6, the fire resulting from the blast immediately fought by use of foam and an emergency 2.5-inch hose line. The fire was put under control in about 3 to 5 minutes and extinguished in about 10 minutes. All ammunition topside was jettisoned. 7, at about 18:10, the USS Chickadee came alongside starboard with fire hoses ready to pass over. So this is the relief ship coming to assist and ultimately rescue the crew. Again, skipping some of the report here. They began to jettison weight, began to throw things overboard, such as their anchors, to try to lift the Osprey in the water and keep it from sinking. This reduction in weight failed to aid the condition of stability. The ship listed until the main deck port side was about 1 foot underwater. With the ship in this condition and in view of the irreparable damage to hull members and the complete lack of watertight integrity as a result of the blast, the order was given at 18:15 to abandon to the USS Chickadee. All cipher and classified publications and radar were destroyed. Keep that from falling into enemy hands, obviously. 9, with the survivors on board, the USS Chickadee hauled clear the salvage tug USS Bannock, then attempted salvage, but the Osprey sank. 10, quartermaster notebooks and muster cards were saved. All service records, health records, and pay accounts were put ashore at Plymouth, England prior to the operation. And then the saddest sentence of all in this report, Muster showed 5 enlisted men and 1 officer missing. Now, those 5 men missing were ultimately declared dead. Their bodies never recovered. And they are, as I say, the first men known to have died in the Normandy invasion. And because they have been so often left out of the historical accounts, I want to specifically call their names and pay tribute to these men. Lieutenant Junior Grade Van Hamilton from Arkansas, Seaman Second Class John Medvich from Pennsylvania, Fireman First Class Walter O'Brien, New York, Quartermaster Second Class Emery Perricky, Illinois, and I apologize if I've misconstrued their names. Motor Machinist Mate Second Class Joseph Vanoski from Ohio, and Motor Machinist Mate Third Class Cleo Witchell from Michigan. The USS Osprey and her D-Day story was actually back in the news a couple of years ago when the wreck of the ship wasn't found. It was actually known where the wreck of the minesweeper was, and it was actually kind of a popular dive site for divers in the English Channel. But in the summer of 2019, right about the time of the 75th anniversary of D-Day, news reports or social media reports rather began to show the bell of the USS Osprey. If you can click forward, there she is again. There's the bell of the Osprey, which someone, no one knew who, had brought up against all the regulations of what should have been happening. And when this began to appear on some social media accounts, then questions began to be asked about why someone had this, where it was, and it was turned over anonymously to British officials, who then turned it over as remnants of an American ship to the United States Navy. And so the Osprey was back in the news, and the bell is now out of the water. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few moments. But let me just sum all this up about the Osprey and why it should be remembered, because, of course, the D-Day story of this one little vessel, the first lost in the greatest amphibious assault of the war, is just one out of thousands and thousands of stories that could be told about D-Day. They all contribute to a fuller understanding of what happened on June 6, 1944, and why it matters in history. But certainly the sacrifice of this valiant little Osprey that has been so often overlooked, and of 6 of her crew who paid the ultimate sacrifice, is one of these stories that we here at the National D-Day Memorial are determined needs to be preserved, needs to be passed on, and their memories need to be recalled. And what I'd like to do now is bring in our special guest, who is Ron Herzig, whose uncle was one of these sailors. So let's bring Ron in.
Hello, John. Hi, John. How are you?
Doing well. Glad everything seems to be working. I'm always nervous about tech glitches and the internet. Because the internet's usually out to get me, but looks like it's all working today.
Yeah, it's a very easy program.
Great. We appreciate you joining us. And I met Ron, by email and then in person. Was it last summer? And
September, I believe.
Yeah, and because he is the nephew of one of the sailors whose names I just mentioned, Joseph Vanoski of Ohio. And I believe I had his picture back there with the names of the men. But Ron, tell us a little bit about your uncle.
Okay. There's a very good site that a high school student from Toledo had done. Her name was Samantha Fletcher, and she did this in, I think it was 2016 approximately. Anyway, and her mentor was Joe Boyle, who a high school teacher. And he actually, I met him when we had a service for my uncle in October 20th, 2016 at Arlington Cemetery. Even though there were no remains, he was buried with full military honors. So 39-piece band, rifle squad, caisson, horse-drawn caisson, etc. And our whole area was blocked off. So my uncle was Joseph Vanaski Jr. He enlisted in 1942. He had been out of college. He was in college for 2 years, and a friend of his, Pete Fuser, was on the USS Atlanta, which was sunk off of Guadalcanal. So they were very close, and that's when he decided to enlist. I guess he went through boot camp probably in Chicago, and he joined Osprey, I think, in 1943, June 15th or someplace like that. He on March 15th, 1943, excuse me. And he was a motor machinist mate second class. So he was probably either in the engine room. There are conflicting reports where he was located when the Osprey struck the mine. One said he was in the engine room, and the other said he was on deck having a cup of hot chocolate. And he was blown overboard, and of course, his remains were never found. And Lieutenant Charles H. Schwim, who you mentioned, wrote a letter after 6 months because he was declared missing in action. And after 6 months, he was finally declared killed, awarded a Purple Heart, which was sent to my grandmother. And he wrote Lieutenant Schwim wrote a very nice letter. I do not have that letter. Probably one of my cousins does have it. So if you're interested, this student, Samantha, did a very nice report called Silent Heroes, actually traveled to Normandy, where my uncle's name is on one of the memorials there. And it's called Silent Heroes. And if you just Google Joseph Vanaski Jr., this will show up. So
it is an excellent site. I used it for research as well, and she did a great job. And to say, I was very impressed with her efforts to keep the memory alive. Have you made contact or gotten to know other relatives of Osprey?
I have not.
Veterans?
I have a cousin, first cousin, who was uncle, also, a nephew of Uncle Joe, Uncle Joey, as we call him. And his memory is very strong with all of us. And there are 6 of us involved with this project right now. And my cousin Tony Bystransky he does a lot of genealogy. He's done a whole genealogy through Ancestry.com of our family. And I found this book, which was the history of the Navy. Excuse me. A history of the Navy. It's called The U.S. Navy at Normandy, Fleet Operations and Operations in the D-Day. And it's by Greg H. Williams, and it was published October 19th, 2020. And it actually has the names and addresses, the street addresses of all the 6 casualties. So my cousin Tony is doing research right now, trying to locate them. But I have not personally made contact. I have talked or emailed with Lou Blackwell, whose father was the commissioning commanding officer for the vessel.
Right. We've gotten some information from Lou too, and I probably should have credited early some of the photos that you saw in our PowerPoint came from emails back and forth with Ron and that he shared with us.
Yeah.
Do you know? Share that.
This is a picture. This is an actual. Can you see that?
Yeah, we're getting.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. Trying to get it a little bit bigger.
That's an actual photograph taken by a crew member of the USS Chickadee, with the Osprey on fire in the channel. And he has passed. I had another cousin who did some research looking at the roster. and the ship's roster of the Osprey. And she's contacted several people, but the last known survivor, I believe, is passed.
Right. Well, tell us, as a survivor of one of the Osprey fatalities, how should they be remembered? How should they be memorialized? And you mentioned your project. What are you working on now?
Well, we visited your facility, which is fantastic. And I've talked to my oldest cousin, who actually knew my uncle, and she's been there several times also. So the first thing we did, we purchased a brick for your memorial for Gold Star families.
They dedicated this Memorial Day, I believe.
That'll be dedicated this memorial, and I believe there'll probably be 6 of us attending that service. We hope. We have 2. Well, there's 4 of us in Virginia. I live in Gloucester, Virginia, which is only about 2.5 hours from Bedford, and another cousin and her son, who live in Colonial Heights. Another one lives in Potomac, Maryland. And then we have one who's still in Ohio, and hopefully they can all attend. So that's step 1. As I mentioned, we had a memorial service. It was October 20th, 2016, and we all attended that. It was a Bluebird Day, and Arlington is they're impeccable. I mean, the funeral director there was 4th generation funeral director. I mean, and he knew the ancestry here is from Slovakia, okay, which is now an independent country. It used to be Czechoslovakia, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But he knew the Byzantine Catholic rite, which was pretty impressive. Anyway, so that's one thing. And this past summer, we were having dinner with some friends, and we were discussing what our relatives and parents did during the war. So I brought up my phone and a picture of my Uncle Joe. And then I saw a picture of the bell, which I had seen before. It's been out there since like 2015, 16, somewhere around there. Recreational divers had recovered it. Another cousin had spoken with a marine archaeologist who actually dove on the site of the wreck. And he said he did not bring up the bell. So as you mentioned, the receiver of the wreck put out the word, they want the bell back. And it was left in like a phone booth or something somewhere. It was anonymously returned. So I saw this picture of the bell with the receiver of the wreck standing next to it. I think it was in a harbor in Portsmouth, England. And I started making inquiries. And that's when I got in touch with you, okay? Because your article, that great podcast that you had written, was square one where I started. And it mentioned that the bell was going to be returned to the Navy. So we talked. This
was a blog post on our webpage, which I presume is still there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
So then I contacted Lou Blackwell, and he gave me the petty officer in charge at the embassy in London, who was in charge of the bell. So I basically asked him, what's the status? And he said the bell was held up. The restoration or the conservation of the bell was held up because of COVID. And I understand now that the bell has been restored. It is bronze, and it was in the channel for over 75 years. So they basically had to leach all the chlorides and everything out of it. But apparently the embassy has paid the receiver of the wreck, who I contacted, and she said it was going back to them. She didn't know exactly. The intent is for the bell to be displayed along with some artifacts from Mr. Blackwell, whose father was, again, the commissioning commander, and at the embassy. So anyway, I have contacted the embassy, the naval attaché, and actually I've written the ambassador, or the charge d'affaires. He's acting ambassador, because hardly any ambassadors have been appointed or nominated or appointed. Anyway, we're waiting to hear back from them. So for the final, the disposition, the ship was made in Virginia. Okay. There's a fair amount of us in Virginia. Your facility is in Virginia, and that's where we'd like to see the vessel come. We can't, come, or the bell to come back to. We contacted several museums and the U.S. Navy History and Heritage Command, the World War II Museum, the Mariners Museum of Virginia, and we felt that your facility would be the best place for the bell to be returned to. So we're waiting to hear. We're not pushing the issue now. I mean, considering the world situation, and the embassy, I'm sure the staff at the embassy is extremely busy. So we're just standing by.
Exactly, and of course, it's premature to say much, but we have expressed interest that should the bell come back to the United States, we would, love to be able to display it here at Bedford and pay tribute to this crew. And the memorial here, we're also discussing ways to represent the Osprey story, because as I said earlier, we have the names of 4,415 men who died on June 6th. And while we talk about it, I've mentioned the Osprey on tour. I've read these names for groups before as we look at the others who died on June 6th. So we're looking at other opportunities just to raise awareness of the Osprey story and these 6 men. And before I get too far, I should have said earlier, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat feature or the comment feature, wherever you're watching, and we'll try to get to those in a minute. At the end, we have a couple comments and questions come in as well. But I think, obviously, Ron, you agree with us that this is a story that needs to be remembered. Only 6 men out of hundreds of thousands who would die from the United States military, but every one of them mattered. And we want to make sure that these men who were the first to die in the invasion, obviously it's not what they wanted. They were doing their duty. But as things transpired, they were the first of many to give their lives for the liberation of Normandy and ultimately victory in Europe. So I'll say, if you have any questions, please put them in. We did get a question come in. Do you know if the men of the Osprey ever held reunions in the years after the war?
I do not. I thought that they did. I know that minesweepers, the minesweeping crews did hold reunions, but I'm not sure about the Osprey. Maybe Lou would know more about that.
I do know in 2009, 65th anniversary, a group from the USS Tide, another minesweeper that was lost on June 7th. And by the way, that's worth pointing out as well. The Osprey was certainly not the only minesweeper to be lost in the English Channel, and they were still clearing mines and doing their duty in very hazardous circumstances for many weeks afterwards. A lot of the ships involved on June 6th, their job was largely done by June 7th, but not the minesweepers. They're still doing their job. But anyway, back to the Tide. The Tide was lost on June 7th, and we had a reunion of some of their survivors. It's been many years now, 2009, but we would certainly have loved to have welcomed the Osprey survivors as well. Another comment just came in. So important to recognize the men of the Osprey and the story of the minesweepers in general. Are the men of the Osprey recognized anywhere in particular?
I do not know. The only place I've seen their names was in your podcast, Stephen Ambrose's book on D-Day, and also this book that I just mentioned by Greg Williams, who actually lists the street addresses, which is
they are on the wall of the missing, because none of the remains were ever recovered. So in the Normandy American Cemetery, their names are on the wall of the missing, but alphabetically, I don't believe they're like a group. So say one thing we are looking at, we have your uncle's name is going to be on one of our veterans bricks, Gold Star brick.
That center photograph is on the wall of the missing in Normandy, and on the marker is the marker in Arlington from 2016.
Excellent. So we are looking for ways to continue to raise awareness of the Osprey story because we're the D-Day Memorial. We are here we exist to memorialize the men who died on D-Day. Another came in. Did any of the crew of the Osprey attend the commissioning of a later Osprey, MHC 51?
I wouldn't know that.
Yeah, I want to say, maybe I'm confusing with another ship that was lost, but I want to say when that vessel, a much more modern naval vessel, was commissioned, I think there was at least one veteran from World War II there, but I could be confusing my minesweepers. If so, I apologize, but I think that would certainly be a great way to establish the link. And the name Osprey, of course, has been used many times. This is just one of many vessels that bore that name. Great. Hey, Mike threw in a couple of comments as well. Thanks to all those who served in World War II. I love these stories. Our military history is of the utmost importance, and none of it should be forgotten. I think we all agree with that. Well, Ron, I want to thank you for joining us today for a great discussion, and we're going to continue working on keeping this story alive. And if you have any questions later on, please email them to us and keep an eye out. Want to invite you to our next Lunchbox lecture, which will be April 7th, Thursday at noon. And we are going to debut an oral history of a D-Day veteran, Joe Dickerson, a great American hero. We have shown the video here in this room, but never really broadcasted. And so this will be your opportunity to see a very well done and very informative tribute to one D-Day veteran. So join us on April 7th as well. But in the meantime, Ron, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Can I make just one more comment?
Absolutely.
Okay. When I was looking through this, there's a pretty good article written by a curator at the World War II Museum, and his name is Joshua Schick. And his article is very similar to your article. So I recommend that somebody might want to read that one too.
That's a lot on just minesweeper operations in general. So that is very informative.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the important subjects. We think of the aircraft carriers, we think of the battleships and cruisers. Believe me, the sailors on those ships had a great appreciation for the minesweepers going ahead of them. So
I actually sailed on a minesweeper.
Oh wow!
I worked for a Marine Institute for several years, and the Navy was decommissioning the USS Thrush, which was built in '55. So we flew down to Port Everglades to bring it back to Virginia, and it was really neat because it's a wooden ship, and all the berthing is forward, and you're sitting there. It's like, and it had a round bottom, and it would roll like it go through a 15-degree roll anytime anything went by it. But so the Institute basically stripped all the sweep gear out of it, and they tow things. They towed things with it. So they did a lot of offshore, a lot of exploration in the Atlantic with it.
Excellent. That's a great story. Of course, they were very often wooden vessels, so they wouldn't set off the magnetic mines.
Mm-hmm.
But even so, say it's a dangerous job to go out there, and it's equivalent to the infantrymen with their minesweepers, going through along the beaches and uncovering the mines. So it's a dangerous but absolutely essential to success. Well, we're going to hold it there, and we're going to thank all of you for joining us for our discussion, and invite you back to our next Lunchbox lecture, and also invite you to come by the National D-Day Memorial. Spring is a wonderful time to visit, so we hope we will see you all soon.
We'll see you on Memorial Day.
Excellent. We'll see you then, Ron. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you.